Alright, so once again, let us go ahead and continue our discussion. So on this part of the module, we will actually talk about what we call the composition in Java programming. When we say compositing, it's the process of combining visual elements from separate sources into a single images. Usually they are used to create the illusion that all those elements are parts of the same scene. Compositing is widely used in film industry to create crowds, entire new worlds, which would be expensive or impossible to create otherwise. Now, for the operation, there are actually several compositing operations. We show some of them in here in the next code example, which is the composition demo program. The alpha composite class implements basic alpha compositing rules for combining source and destination colors to achieve blending and transparency effects with graphics and at the same time images. Now, for example, we want to draw two objects on a panel. The first object drawn is called what we call the destination. In our Java program later on, that will be called as the DST or the rules. And the second one is actually a source. The alpha composite here determines how these two objects are going to be blended together. If we have an alpha composite that src underscore over rule, the pixels of the source object will be drawn where the two objects overlap. In this website here, which I am actually showing to you, this is the field summary of the alpha composite or the compositing in Java 2D API. Yung src underscore over, yan, it will actually be yan, over destination rule na tawag natin. We will be using the following rules such as a top, yan, in source, held out by the source rule, and so on. So, tignan natin kung paano nga ba natin yan i-implement later on. So, let's go ahead and create here our class, which is composition x.java. So, let's write here composition x. Yan. Tapos, let us extend JFrame as usual. Tapos dito naman, public static void main string args. Ayan. So since we extended the JFrame here, it's important for us to import the following packages. Number one, the composite, and alpha composite. Number two is the color, since gagamit tayo dito ng color in particular. Especially yung mga ano natin, yung mga shapes natin. Tapos si event queue, we also have here graphics, and the graphics 2D, and we will also be using the buffered image for later on. Tapos si JFrame and JPanel. Now, if you will try to take a look, let's try to check and see the sample program here. If you will try to analyze this one, we have several types of composition in which will be determined by the rule na gagamitin natin later on. So, let's manipulate first the main method here. Okay. Gawin na natin agad dito si event queue. Diba? So, event queue dot invoke later new runnable. Tapos, let's instantiate the object composition x. Yan. Composition x is equal to new composition x. Tapos, let's set the visibility into true. Alright, so, working good. Now, on the public class, let's create here the constructor composition x. And on this part of the code is where we will try to manipulate or modify the properties of our JFrame. So, in this case, i-set natin yung title niya muna. Ayan. Let's set the title as composition, for example. Composition. The size, which is 400 by 120. We also be setting the location relative to. Tapos si default clause operation na JFrame dot exit on close. Now, let's also add a panel here in which I will call that as what we call the surface composition, or surface composition na lang muna. Ganun siya. Okay? So, since I instantiated a new object here in which a panel, and I added that directly to our JFrame, gawin natin yung dito. Surface composition. Ayan. Extends JPanel. So, nawala na yung error niya, di ba? So, we have here the surface composition extends JPanel. Now, here is where we will be creating the override annotation. Tapos, si public void paint component. Tapos, graphics G, for example. Ayan. So, let's call all the components of the graphics. Tapos, ipasa natin yun dito kay doDrawing na method. Tapos, si doDrawing natin is where we will be casting out or casting the entire private void doDrawing. Ayan. Tapos, i-cast natin dito so, basically, same process. Kung napansin nyo, we have been doing this since kanina, di ba? So, graphics 2D, g.create. And, yan, agad natin siya. I-dispose, or gawa agad tayo dito ng dispose. Ayan. Para mas sure. Now, on this part, I would like to create here a variable which is actually in final, and I'll call them as rule. These are the different rules na meron tayo in terms of the alpha composite. So, private final int dapat to. Private final int, and I'll store them in an array. Okay. Is equal to the following. So, we have, number 1, we have alpha composite .dst. We also have here alpha composite .tst underscore atop. And basically, ito yun, yung mga ginagawa ko dito. Yan, destination rules natin. So, alpha composite what do you call this one? Alpha composite dst underscore out. Yan. Tapos, alpha composite .src. Oops, this should be comma. Yan. Alpha composite .src source atop. Tapos, alpha composite .src out. Ayan. So, yun yung mga gagamitin natin. Ayusin ko lang. Alright. So, this is rules position 0, rule position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5. So, since I stored all of the rules ni Alpha Composite in a particular array, and dito sa loob ng doDrawing, I would like to create here a for loop. Ang ginagawa na ito ni for loop, okay, I'll declare the initial value as 20. Tapos, meron din tayong 20 dito na initial value ni y. And for the initial value of I will be 0. So, I initialized here 3 different variables sa loob ng for loop natin. So, each variable here will have their own conditions. In this case, for as long as I is less than the length of the rules, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, meaning kapag napunta na dito si 6, titigil na yung program natin. Alis na siya sa mismo for loop niya. And we have here 60, tapos I++. So, basically, what I'm trying to do here is identifying the different positions, okay? The different positions of the square or the rectangle na i-fill natin later on. Ayan. Oops, for loop yan. So, ganyan siya. So, take note, x is equal to 20, y is equal to 20, I is equal to 0, rules.length, x plus or equals 60, tapos I plus plus. Alright, now, alpha composite, I'll name that as AC. So, alpha composite AC is equal to alpha composite dot get instance, tapos let's call each rule one by one. So, starting from rule number 0, which is the DST, ayan, instance yan eh. So, 0.8, tingnan natin kung ano yan. So, the 0.8 float value here is actually for us to determine the transparency lang nung mismong DST. Kasi initially, ang gusto natin mangyari, itong si rule number 0 na to, kasi since si I initialized or will start from 0, alam natin na ang kalalabasan niyan is like this one. So, this is not a full transparency, but rather like 80% transparency lang yan. So, kaya ako nilagay dyan si 0.8f. Okay? Next, here, I'll use here the buffered image, and I'll name that as buff image. Yan. For the buffered image, I would like to put a value here of 60, 60, tapos si buffered image, the type, and RGB. Basically, yung color lang, coloring render lang yan. Tapos, graphics 2D, I'll name that as GBI. And using the buffer image earlier, I would like to create the graphics from that one. So, importante po na meron tong 3 steps na to when you would like to have a composition dito, or if you would like to compose it some object sa loob ng Java program mo. Okay, so we have GBI, that's set paint. I'll name this as color.blue. Tapos, GBI.fillRec. For the fillRec, ito yung unang position natin ng, yan. So, 0, 0, 40, and 40. The position of the first rectangle. And, saka ko ilalagay si composition, set composite niya into the alpha composite na ginawa natin dito, which is ito. Okay, so ano nga ba ulit to? So, starting from 0, nag-create ka dyan ng rectangle in which will eventually, yan, have a position of 0, 0, 40, 40. Tapos, continue natin. Let's set another paint here, which is color.green. Tapos, lagay natin dito si fillRec ulit. And, this time, let's position the next rectangle into something like that. And lastly, we draw the image one by one using the for loop na ginawa natin. Tapos, the values of x and y. So, initially, 20 and 20 ang value ni x and y dito. So, ibig sabihin, ang next position ngayon ni rectangle natin is nasa x, y, tapos null. And, let's dispose that. Tapos dispose natin ulit dito yan. Dispose. So, ganun lang ang kung paano gumawa ng program with a very basic composite using the following rules na meron tayo. So, dito papasok yung rules na yan. So, ito kasi, since I stored them into array, initially, you can just simply use here alphacomposite.tst. Ganyan siya. So, pwedeng ganyan. Pero, since naka-install natin siya sa array, for every time na umaandar yung program mo, it will simply determine the positioning of your, of your rules. So, sa unang execute niyan, 0 rule ang gagamitin. Ito. Sa pangalawa, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. And every time na nangyayari yan, nag-iterate din by 60 yung position ng rectangles mo, yung coordinates mo. So, ganyan siya. Although, pwede mo siyang tanggalin, pwede mo tanggalin itong for loop na to. Okay, so pwede mo tanggalin yung for loop na yan kung nahihirapan kayo mag-for loop. Then, just simply identify the position of the rectangle manually dito. So, ito lang ang babaguhin mo dito. Itong rules na to. Then, paulit-ulit mo siyang gagawin. So, let's try to run that. Ayun. So, working na, di ba? So, nakagawa tayo dito ng program in which simply created the compositing sa Java program natin. So, very basic. Just a very simple program. Once again, pwede nyo pong itanggalin itong for loop na to. Then, baguhin nyo lang yung code na to. You just simply modify the code in order for you. If you are having some problems or difficulties using for loop and determining the positions. In this case kasi, the position of the for loop or the rectangles are in places. So, napakadali yan eh. Ayan, no? So, kung napansin nyo rin, yung color green dito, yan yung pinang-overlap natin. Diba? So, ganun po siya. Very, very basic program. Diba? So, next, after the composition demo program here, I'm gonna show you the what we call sun and cloud program, in which the sun will be coming from behind the cloud. And in this case, we will use what we call the composition technique, and we will try to have an animation dito. A very basic animation lang naman to. Alright, so let's go ahead. Let's create here a class sun and cloud x.java. So public class sun and cloud x. Tapos let's extend the JFrame, the main method, and tapos before we start, I want you guys first to download the following. First of all, mag-download ka muna dito ng image ng sun, and the same time image din ng cloud. Yung napakaliit lang na image. So in my case, ganito lang siya. So mangyayari dito, using transparency effects and composition, yung sun na to magpapakita, parang mag-a-appear siya bigla or gradually, not really bigla pero gradually lang siya. And magkakaroon lang yan ng konting effect na very basic effect lang. I only use a very basic non-transparent image. So, expect nyo na white yung magiging background nung natin dito. Medyo obvious na ganyan. Pero if you would like to have like a transparent image, you can go ahead and do that as well. Ayan. So, dito tayo ngayon sa mga import packages natin. So, first of all, Alpha Composite, tapos si Event Queue, tapos si Graphics, tapos si Graphics 2D, diba? Tapos si Image, syempre, kasi merong image tayong gagamitin. Meron din tayong Action Event, of course, since gumagalaw yan Action Listener. So, may repaint method din ulit yan. Meron tayo ditong image, buffered image. So, kung napansin nyo, pinagsasama-sama natin ang 3 different concepts. Image, composition, and transparency already. Buffered image, we have as well image icon. Tapos, meron din tayo ditong JFrame. And lastly, meron tayo ditong JPanel. And yeah, nakalimutan ko ilagay dito si timer kasi syempre ma-under yan Timer. Ayan. Next here is for us to work on the main method, which is very easy. In this case, event queue dot invoke later, new runnable, public void run sun and cloud x. I'll name that as x once again. New sun cloud x, sun and cloud x. Tapos x that's set visible into true. So in just below the public class, we have here the public sun and cloud x constructor, in which now we'll call the init UI. We'll just simply set the properties of the JFrame. So the title, sun and cloud, the size here, which is 300 by 210, for example. We have here location relative to null and default close operation, JFrame that exit and close. And let's also add a panel here, instantiate a new object. Let's name that a surface, sun, and cloud. Ayan siya. So, surface, sun, and cloud. Ayan. So, let's continue our program here. Surface, sun, and cloud. So, nandito na tayo sa may bandang ito. Tapos, let's extend JPanel. Surface, sound, and cloud. Alright. Since meron tayo dito action event, we will also be implementing action listener. Yun yung una nating i-work muna para mawala yung error dito. So, for the action listener here, alam naman natin kung anong pinakagagawin natin dito. Override annotation, and the public void, action performed, tapos action event, let's name that as E. And I'll call the step method and at the same time the repaint method later on. So, okay na ang action perform natin. Let's create another override annotation for the graphics public void paint component graphics G. Tapos dito ulit super.paint component G do drawing. Ayan. So, si do drawing, this is actually where, once again, alam na natin to, do drawing is where we will be casting and calling all the graphics functionalities and will be stored in the graphics 2D functionality na gagawin natin. So, private void do drawing graphics G. And so, we have here graphics. I'll name that as G2G once again. Graphics 2D G.create. So, okay na yun dapat, no? Yan. Now, we have here the step. Yung pinaka-step kasi, ang purpose na itong step na to is, again, we will simply determine the transparency effect. Okay? Nung mismo natin. If you can still remember our program earlier, yung may step. Nasaan ba yung may step dito? Yung sinet natin, ito. We actually set here the alpha or the transparency effect from nothing, from 1% lang up to umabot siya sa pinaka gusto natin. 'Di ba? And by that time, automatic magi-stop na yung program and the timer itself. So therefore, it will actually work as the same, but then before anything else, we have to declare first the following variables. So, syempre, gawa tayo dito ng image kung saan natin ilalagay si sun. Ganon din dito kay cloud. Diba? Tapos si timer, since pinag-uusapan natin si timer dito. And the alpha value, which is 1F. And we have here final int delay, which is 600. Yan. So, before we work on dito sa may step na to, let's try to actually work first the constructor and the images itself. So, dito sa loob ng constructor na to, yan, sa constructor na gagawin natin, dito natin kasi tatawagin, di ba? Isa-set up yung mismong image natin. So, in order for us to do that, we have here the constructor public surface sun and cloud. Okay. Then we have here the load images, should I say. Tapos init timer. So isa-set natin dito si timer later on. So gawin muna natin si load image. Si load image here will be private void load images. Yan. So this is actually where I will now set image icon. Tapos dito is simply the path. Nataalala ko, this is sun.png. Tapos .get image. Ganun din dito kay cloud. So this should be new image icon. Yan, new image icon src the dash cloud dot jpg. So in your case, depende kung ano magiging name ng image ninyo. So okay na yung image natin. Now let's work on the init timer. I will just simply set here private void init timer. Ayan. Tapos timer is equal to new timer with an initial delay reference to itself and start yung timer. Pagkaraan ng program, mag-i-start yung timer natin. So, it's time for us to work on the what we call the step naman. Diba? Dito sa itong mismong step method natin. For the step method, we can just simply copy and paste whatever things na ginawa natin kanina, diba? So, alpha, this is alpha minus or equal 0.1. Ayan. Tapos, if the alpha is less than or equal to 0, the alpha will now be 0 and the timer will now be stopped. Pag sinabi natin alpha is equal to 0, ibig sabihin 0% transparency na siya. Yan. So, ganyan po siya. Timer.stop. Now, let's continue. Dito tayo sa do drawing kasi di ba alam naman natin ang nangyayari lahat ng gusto natin mangyari dito sa loob ng do drawing. So, inside the do drawing, just below the casting of graphics 2D, yan. This is still error. Graphics 2D, dapat yan. Buffered image, I'll name that as buffim. Yan, new buffered image. So, I'll set the size. Tapos yung color niya. Ayan. Tapos yung graphics 2D, GPI. So, basically, yung parang kaninang ginawa lang din natin, di ba? Buff image. Let's create the graphics itself. Now, for the alpha composite, I'll name that as AC this time. Tapos, si alpha composite get instance, just like what we have done earlier. Ang pinaka-rule na gagamitin natin dito is src underscore over. Diba? So, nag-go over yan. Tapos, ang value natin is the whatever value ni alpha na sinet natin. Ano ang value ni alpha? And for now, 100%. So, ibig sabihin, kita mo pa lahat ng image. So, ang gagawin natin dito, since yung alpha niya nababawasan ng every timer, and dito yan, pupunta yan dito, the alpha will now become, kasi less than to, no? So, from 100%, nababawasan, or 1, nababawasan niya ng 0.1. So, in reality, from 100%, nababawasan niya ng around 10% every time na umiikot yan. And once na na-reach na yung 0, yung alpha will now become 0, ibig sabihin na wala na, diba? Tapos si timer will now eventually be stopped. Ganun siya. So, the GBI here, the draw image, I would like to draw the image of the sun, their position, yan. Tapos, set natin yung composite into alpha. Tapos, draw image natin ulit into cloud, the position, tapos i-draw image natin ulit si buffer image 2020 null, tapos i-dispose natin sila both. We have here the GBI and the graphics 2D. Both of them will be disposed afterwards. Alright, so let's try to run the program here. Ayun siya, di ba? So, Ang effect lang naman nito, mukha lang talagang papakita si sun, pero in reality, ang nagbabago lang talaga sa kanila is transparency nila. Ayan o. Diba? Si sun, kung napansin nyo maigi, ayan o. So, yung transparency nila are actually the same. I mean, not the same, pero nagsasalubong sila, gumaganyan siya. Using the compositing natin na SRC underscore over natin na ginamit. So, ganun siya. Yan. Any questions so far? Okay, so tingnan natin yung code natin. Baka mamaya kasi may mga nakalimutan kayo dito eh. So, surface, any timer, to drawing, paint component, the step is tama. Okay. So, everything is working perfectly fine, di ba? Alright, so next example here is the Spotlight program, which is I think one of the most challenging program na pwede natin gawin dito sa Java 2D API na to. The Spotlight program is simply a strong beam of light that illuminates only a small area, used especially to center attention on a stage performer. So we will actually try to integrate multiple concepts here, such as image, transparency, tapos yung mismong compositing natin. So let's try to create here a program, yan, with a name Spotlight X. So just like earlier, public class Spotlight X extends JFrame. Tapos si main method natin. Alright, so let us now go ahead and import the following packages here. So again, kung tinatamad po kayong mag-import and para ma-sure, pwede nyo naman pong gawin ng ganyan lang. Diba? Pero syempre, gusto kong makita ninyo kung ano yung mga ginagamit natin. So, alpha composite, si color, si event queue, tapos si graphics, tapos si graphics 2D, ayan, tapos si image, syempre, di ba? Meron din tayong, this time may event tayo, but then since ginagalaw kasi natin yung spotlight, it's not an action event, but rather what we call the mouse event. Yan. So for the mouse event, we have what we call the mouse adapter. Siya po yung magpapagana dyan. Oops, mouse adapter. Bago yan, di ba? Tapos we have here out that image, the buffered image in which we will try to write later on. Javax, that swing, that image icon, tapos Javax that swing, that JFrame, and Javax that swing, JPanel. Ayan. So we have prepared all of our packages that we will be using for this program. So let's go ahead here and continue our program. So dito tayo sa public static void main natin, main method, in which we already know that the main method here simply have the event queue that invoke later, new runnable, public void run, in which will now eventually instantiate the object, Spotlight X. Makinig po tayo maigi dito kasi medyo mahirap yung program na to, medyo mas madami siyang process. So we set the visibility into true. Alright, so let's work on the constructor Spotlight X. Yan. Oops, Spotlight X, tapos constructor yan, init UI, tapos this is where we will again be setting up the size of our frame. This should be around 350 by 300. The title is around, let's say, Spotlight. Set location relative to null, of course. set default close operation into JFrame that exit and close. So let's add here a panel. I'll call this a surface spotlight. And eventually gagawin din natin yan dito, class surface spotlight. And I would like to extend the JPanel. Ayun. So dapat alam na natin to, diba? Itong part na to kasi ginagawa na rin natin siya all throughout. Alright, so let's prepare the following. First, this time unahin ko muna si constructor niya, spotlight. Prepare lang muna natin. Yan. Tapos dito, once again we have what we call what do you call this one? The mouse adapter, diba? So ibig sabihin there will be a separate class for the mouse adapter which will be used later on. So yung surface spotlight dito, this will actually simply, this is a constructor and will simply set the init UI, and I'm planning to set the images dito sa part na to. Okay, so before that, syempre, gawin muna natin si override annotation. Tapos this time, I would like to use protected. Yan, gusto ko siya i-protect. Graphics G. Oops, yan, diba? And inside the graphics G is I'll call the plate component. Tapos, I'm gonna throw the do drawing to that one. Okay, so may do drawing na tayo, di ba? So, let's create here the do drawing. The do drawing is private void do drawing. And this time, it will have a parameter of graphics G. Ayan. Tapos, gamitin natin si graphics 2D, G2D is equal to casting ng graphics 2D natin, G.create. And very simple. So we already know how to do this. Alright, so let's actually proceed with what we called here what do you call this one? The surface spotlight. Itong surface spotlight na to, tatawagin ko dito si init UI ulit. Pero this time, ibang init UI na. Hindi na yung init UI dito sa baba. Kasi take note, naka-separate class siya. So, ibig sabihin, whatever, even though they have the same name of the method, they belong to the different classes. So, ibig sabihin, ito, we'll simply call this method here, not the method below. Kasi nga nasa separate class siya. This will simply load the image. Ayan. And we'll simply get the size, get width, the size, the width and the height, and get height, null. Okay. Pero, syempre, meron pa kayo nakikitang error dyan kasi hindi pa natin i-declare yung mga yan, di ba? So, we have here, number 1, of course, si radius ng circle natin, which is 50. 50, maliit lang. Yung nakikita nyo lang sa example natin. We also have here private image, yan. Tapos, we also have another IW, which is yung kanina na ginawa ko. Tapos, si IH, na ginawa ko rin kanina. We also have int X and int Y. And lastly, mouse in. So, gagamit tayo ng mouse in dito. Now, nawala ng error dito, but then the load image method is still an error because, of course, hindi pa natin siya ginagawa. So, in order for us to do this, we have private void load image. And this time, kagaya rin ng ginawa natin kanina from our previous example, image is equal to new image icon. And let's put the path, marin.pg, get image. Ganun siya. So, we have here the do drawing and everything. Now, there is actually some more missing components, because what we will try to do here is we will try to have our program be controlled by the mouse. And in order for us to do that, we can just simply use here add mouse motion listener. Yan. So itong may mouse adapter nito, I am just simply calling this package here na in-import natin kanina, itong mouse event na to. And the my mouse adapter is actually a new object which I will be instantiating later on. And so since meron tayong motion, meron din tayo dito mouse listener now. So for the mouse listener here, I will also be calling the mouse adapter object as well. So I instantiated an entirely new object kung napansin nyo. So saan natin ilalagay si panibago natin na object? So lagay natin yan dito. Diba? So we have here private class my mouse adapter, which is actually the same, and I would like to extend that into mouse adapter. So dapat mawala na yung error dito. Ayun, di ba? So nawala na yung error. So we have created, an inner class inside the entire class of the surface spotlight na meron tayo. So inside here, the mouse adapter, this is actually where we will be placing the what you call this one, the components or the properties ni mouse mo. Now for mouse adapter, meron kasi tayong 3 different things na gagawin. Number 1 is when we move the mouse, it will automatically get the X and Y value. So ito, di ba? So kapag kami move natin yan, kukunin natin yung X and Y value. Next is once the mouse has entered the J-frame, automatic magsaset tayo ng boolean dyan into true kasi nag-enter na. And once nag-exit na yung mouse sa mismong J-frame natin, magiging false na yung value niyan. So we can do that by simply creating the following. So gawin ko muna dito is si mouse exited. Public void mouse exited, for example. Yan. Mouse event E. Okay. Tapos si mouse in. Initially, kapag ka nag-exit na yung mouse, syempre false na yan. So, saan nanggaling tong mouse in na to? Ayan po, dito sa private boolean natin na dineclare. So, private void boolean mouse in. Okay. So, if nangyari yan, syempre, repaint natin yan. Another override annotation here, which is public void mouse entered. Itong mga ginagamit nating method na to, this is actually built in the mouse itself, the mouse event mismo. So, mouse in is equal this time into true. And lastly, we will try to call or determine the X and Y values of the mouse position itself. So, kapag ka nagmo-move ka ng mouse, meron ka ditong mouse event E in which we'll simply get the value of their positions. And we will store that in the variable X and Y. Get Y. Tapos, repaint method as well. Yan. Saya ng Java. Ang daming na-introduce na methods, diba? Ito pa, built-in po yan. Nandiyan na yan sa loob. Alright. So, hindi pa yan gumagana kasi syempre, wala pa tayo yung, although naset na natin yung image, diba? Hindi pa yan kumpleto kasi hindi pa natin work on si do drawing. Now, in the do drawing, this is the part where we will actually make the J-frame appear and at the same time, the mouse event will happen. So, we can do that by simply, number 1, determining the position of, or the middle position of course, the image itself. So, kunin natin si get width, i-minus natin si whatever value na nakuha natin from ganyan, tapos si 2. Ano ulit si IW? IW is simply the width and the image, width and the height of the image itself. So what we are trying to do here is to simply determine the middle position of every images na gagamitin natin. So kahit anong image po ang ilagay nyo, automatic magpo-position yan sa gitna. Or, since nagset tayo dito ng size ng J-frame, sa gitna niyan. in particular. So we have here get width, get height, and IH divided by 2. Ayan. Okay, so palabasin natin si image. I'll name that as BI, new buffered image. I will be getting the width. I will also be getting the height of the image. Tapos, type in RGB tayo. RGB in particular. Tapos, si graphics 2D. Gamitin natin si bi.create graphics. So, basically, pinalabasan natin si image dito. So, now, let's create here a condition na kapag ka pumasok si mouse, may mangyayari dun sa program. Otherwise, di ba? False na to. So, for as long as the mouse is inside the image itself. So, dito yan. Kinukuha yan dito. Yan. If the mouse has entered the JFrame, what will happen? Ngayon, using the graphics 2D earlier, itong BIGR na to, we will be setting the color. Yan. Oops. Sorry. Set paint color that white. Ano ang siniset kong color dito? Yung ito. Yung mismo. Yung color na yan. Diba? Next here is where we will be using the oval. Meron tayong fill oval dito. Yung fill oval, we will just simply use the radius. Pero x minus the radius, y minus the radius. Kasi ang radius natin dito is 60 eh. Ang value ni x natin dito is simply the position of the position of the mouse. So, ibig sabihin, if the position of the mouse is 100 and over 100, halimbawa. So, nandito halimbawa yon. So, magmaminus si radius which is 50. Diba? So, ang magiging size ngayon ni oval is dependent on, of course, the position of the mouse. Pero, syempre, constant pa rin ang position ni radius, ang size ni radius natin dito which is 50. So, ang radius natin is y minus radius. Tapos, lastly, radius multiplied by 2. Diba? So, circle yan eh. So, radius multiplied by 2. So, size yan nung circle mismo. So, 50 multiplied by 2, 50 multiplied by 2 later on. So, ito lang, depende yan yung magiging position nito. So, nag-iiba ang positioning ni radius. Depende kung nasaan din position si mouse mo. So, ganun po yung idea na itong program na to. Yan. So, we will be setting up the composite as well. In this time, we have SRC atop. Ayan. SRC atop. And, i-draw ko si image. Lastly, i-draw ko si image. Ayan. So, kung saan yung position niya. Mid Y, IW, I height, and reference to itself. Ayan. So, if the mouse entered, ganun po yung mangyayari dito. After that, we will be setting the composite into alpha composite dot src over. Ayan. And we will be deriving a value of 0.1. This is actually for the purpose of transparency effect nito. Ayan o. So, since naka-white to, diba? So, naka-white yan eh. So, magkakaroon yan ng transparency effect na parang, yun nga, pagka natutukan ng spotlight, mag-aano yan dito. Liliwanag ng konti yung part na natutukan yan ng spotlight. Diba? So, we will be using SRC over with that. Tapos, let's draw the image. Ayan. Same as earlier, mid X, mid Y, IW, IH, this. And we will be disposing the graphics 2D. And lastly, we will draw the image once again. Pero this time, we will be using the BI, which is ito. yung initial width and height mo. Kasi parang dalawa yan eh. Parang dalawang image yan na pinagpatong natin. Yun yung concept niya. So, BI 0, 0, get width, get height, reference to itself, and dispose the graphics studio itself. Now, let's try to run the program. Alright, so let's see if everything is working perfectly fine. Again, initially, the value here or the color of, it looks transparent, pero in reality, naglagay ka lang talaga ng color na white. Yan, di ba? Naglagay ka lang talaga ng color na white. But then, yun nyo, once nilagay ko yung spotlight natin, there you go. So, nagki-clip siya. I mean, not really clipping, pero this is still compositing. So, ina-activate mo yung composite. Once na umalis yung mouse, nawawala rin yung composite. Diba? So, if on your end, I want you guys to try other images and try to set their, their properties or try to at least change their values. So, this is actually fun. Ayan. Ang ganda. So, kung gusto nyo baguhin yung size ng circle mo, you can just simply go ahead and go here sa radius. Baguhin mo lang kung gusto mong mas maliit. Ayun. Diba? So, kung gusto mong mas malaki, baguhin mo lang ulit yung radius. Ayun, diba? So, there you go. Have any questions so far?